My mother-in-law changed her will the day I got pregnant. She smiled at my baby shower. I already knew. This story begins with a smile. Not just any smile, the specific smile of a woman who believes she has already won. The kind of smile that sits slightly too comfortably on a face, that carries in its corners the quiet satisfaction of someone who has arranged the furniture of a situation to their advantage, and is now simply waiting for others to sit down in the chairs she has placed. The woman wearing that smile was named Patricia Holt. She was 63 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed for a Saturday afternoon baby shower in the living room of her son's house. She was holding a glass of sparkling water and surveying the room with the specific pleasure of someone who feels entirely at home in a space and has her reasons for that feeling. The woman across the room, watching her, was named Grace. Grace was 31 years old. She was 7 months pregnant with her first child. She was the host's daughter-in-law, the guest of honor, the woman whose friends and family had filled this living room with flowers and laughter and a table of food that had taken 2 days to prepare. She was also the woman who had known for 4 months exactly what Patricia had done. And she was the woman who, in approximately 45 minutes, was going to hand Patricia a small white envelope that would make the smile disappear forever. My name is... This is not my story to tell in the first person, but I know it well enough to tell it truly. And what I can tell you is this. The 45 minutes between that smile and that envelope are some of the most quietly devastating 45 minutes you will ever hear about. Subscribe and stay with me, because what Grace had been doing in the 4 months before that baby shower is something Patricia never saw coming. Let me tell you about Grace Chen Holt. She was 31 years old, a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in Chicago, Illinois. She had grown up in a family that valued precision and preparation. Her father was an engineer, her mother a pharmacist, and the household she had been raised in had instilled in her the specific discipline of people who understand that most problems, examined carefully enough in advance, contain their own solutions. She had met Marcus Holt at a law school alumni event 5 years earlier. He was 33, a financial advisor, the kind of man who was steady and direct, and whose reliability was not a performance, but a disposition. They had dated for 2 years before marrying in a ceremony that was, by all accounts, exactly what they had wanted. Small, specific, theirs. Grace had met Patricia before the proposal. She had met her several times, in fact, and had formed her assessment with the careful attention of someone trained to read between the lines of what is said and what is meant. Patricia Holt was a woman who loved her son with a completeness that left very little room for anyone else. She had been widowed 8 years earlier when Marcus's father had died of a sudden cardiac event, and the decade since had organized itself around Marcus in the way of a person who has lost their primary relationship and transferred its full weight to the next most available one. She was not cruel. She was not overtly hostile. She was something more precise than that. She was a woman who had decided, without examining the decision, that Grace was a complication in a life she had already arranged, and who had been managing that complication with the smooth efficiency of someone who has been managing things for a very long time. The management was subtle. Comments about Grace's work hours, delivered with concern, never criticism. Questions about her family background that were framed as interest and functioned as assessment. The specific way Patricia organized family occasions so that Marcus's time and attention flowed naturally toward her and away from his wife. Not dramatically, just the accumulated effect of 100 small arrangements. Grace noticed all of it. She documented none of it at first, because it was all deniable, and because Marcus loved his mother, and because Grace was a woman who chose her battles with the precision of someone who understands that not every battle is worth the cost of fighting. But she noticed. They had been married for 2 years when Grace became pregnant. The pregnancy was planned. They had discussed it carefully, timed it deliberately, prepared for it in the way of two organized people who understand that children require more than love to raise well. They were happy. Marcus was, in the specific way of men who have wanted something and received it, luminous with it. Patricia received the news at a Sunday dinner, 3 weeks after they had confirmed it themselves. She smiled. She said she was thrilled. She stood up and hugged Grace with the warmth of a woman performing warmth convincingly. Grace hugged her back and watched her eyes over her shoulder. The eyes were doing something. The smile was not. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you've ever seen that specific combination. Because Grace had seen it before, and she knew what it meant. Grace found out about the will 6 weeks after the pregnancy announcement. She did not find out through any dramatic discovery. No overheard phone call. No document left carelessly in view. She found out because she was a corporate attorney who had spent 8 years reading between the lines of legal documents, and because a woman named Helen, Patricia's sister-in-law, who had never fully shared Patricia's assessment of Grace, and who had her own complicated history with Patricia's management of the Holt family, had called her on a Tuesday afternoon with information she felt Grace deserved to have. Helen told her what she knew, that Patricia had consulted with her estate attorney approximately 2 weeks after the pregnancy announcement. That the existing will, which had left the Holt family estate, divided equally between Marcus and his sister, Claire, with provisions for any future grandchildren, had been revised. That the revision had made the provisions for grandchildren significantly more restrictive, with conditions attached that would give Patricia, through a family trust structure, ongoing influence over how and when those assets were accessed. She's trying to maintain control even after she's gone, Helen said. Over Marcus, over the baby, over you. Grace thanked her. She hung up and sat at her desk for a long time. Then she did what she always did when presented with a legal situation that required a response. She opened a document and started taking notes. Over the following 2 weeks, Grace did 3 things. First, she verified what Helen had told her. Not through Patricia's attorney. She had no access to those records and no reason to request them. But through the specific channels available to a corporate attorney who understands how estate structures work and how to read their implications when they surface in family financial discussions. Marcus, who managed the family's investment accounts, had noticed certain restructuring that he had mentioned to Grace in passing. The mentions, assembled in sequence, confirmed the shape of what Helen had described. Second, she consulted with a colleague, a trust and estate specialist named David Park, who was not her attorney of record, but who owed her a professional favor and was willing to spend 2 hours walking her through her options over coffee. David was precise and thorough. He explained the structure Patricia had created. He explained its implications. He explained what Grace and Marcus could do, legally and practically, to ensure that Patricia's post-mortem control over their family's financial life was as limited as possible. The good news, David said, is that she can control what she leaves. She cannot control what you build independently. And there are structures available to you that would make the provisions in her will largely irrelevant to your actual financial life. Third, Grace talked to Marcus. This was the conversation she had spent 2 weeks preparing for, not because she doubted Marcus, but because the conversation required her to tell her husband that his mother had responded to the news of his child by immediately moving to limit that child's access to family resources unless Patricia's conditions were met. It required her to say, clearly and with documentation, that the woman who had just hugged her over a Sunday dinner table had spent the intervening weeks with an estate attorney. She told him on a Thursday evening at the kitchen table, with David's notes and her own documentation spread between them. Marcus read everything. He was quiet for a long time. "She did this the week after we told her," he said finally. "Yes. While she was telling us, she was thrilled." "Yes." He looked at Grace. "What do you want to do?" Grace had been waiting for that question for 2 weeks. She had her answer ready. "Stay with me," because what Grace proposed to Marcus that Thursday evening is the kind of plan that takes months to execute and arrives, when it arrives, with the specific weight of something that you've been building in silence. Grace's plan was not dramatic. It was not designed to be dramatic. It was designed to be effective, to produce a specific outcome through a series of careful, legal, well-documented steps that would leave Patricia with no recourse and no one to blame except the choices she had made. The core of the plan was this: Grace and Marcus would restructure their own financial life in such a way that Patricia's will, whatever it contained, would have no meaningful impact on their family's security or autonomy. They would do this quietly, methodically, over the 4 months before the baby arrived. And they would do it while Grace attended every family dinner and accepted every gift and smiled at every occasion as if nothing had changed. Because for Grace, nothing had changed. She had always known what Patricia was. The will had simply made it documentable. David Park became their attorney of record for the restructuring. Over the following 3 months, Grace and Marcus established a family trust, separate from the Holt family trust, structurally independent of anything Patricia controlled. They moved assets. They restructured accounts. They documented everything with the precision of 2 people who understood that documentation was not paranoia, but protection. They also did something else, something that Grace had suggested and Marcus had agreed to with the quiet fury of a man who has understood, fully and finally, what his mother had been doing. They updated their own wills. The Holt family estate, Patricia's estate, the one she had restructured to maintain control, was not mentioned in their documents. It did not need to be. What their documents reflected was the life they had built independently. The accounts, the trust, the house. The careful accumulation of two people who had been building something that belonged entirely to them. Patricia's will could say whatever Patricia wanted it to say. It had become, through 4 months of quiet work, largely irrelevant to the actual financial life of Grace and Marcus Holt. Meanwhile, Grace attended Sunday dinners. She asked Patricia questions about her garden. She accepted Patricia's opinions about nursery colors with the gracious attention of a daughter-in-law who values input. She went with Patricia to a baby furniture store on a Saturday afternoon and spent 2 hours considering cribs, while Patricia offered recommendations with the comfortable authority of someone who believes she has a stake in the decisions being made. She smiled. She thanked her. She said nothing. Marcus found this more difficult. He was not a man who found sustained performance easy, and knowing what he knew made every Sunday dinner a specific kind of exercise. Grace had talked with him about this, had explained clearly that the plan required patience, that confronting Patricia before the baby shower would give her time to respond, to maneuver, to construct a version of events that served her. The confrontation needed to happen after the plan was complete, after there was nothing left for Patricia to change. He agreed. He held it. It cost him something. Grace knew it cost him something, and she loved him for paying the cost. The baby shower was scheduled for a Saturday in October, 7 weeks before the due date. Patricia had offered to help organize it, and Grace had accepted gracefully. And Patricia had thrown herself into the planning with the specific energy of someone who understood that a baby shower was an occasion to demonstrate centrality. The invitations, the flowers, the food, the carefully curated guest list that included Patricia's friends alongside Grace's. All of it had Patricia's organizing hand in it. She had built the stage. She did not know that Grace had written a different ending for the performance. Type patient in the comments if you understand what 4 months of that kind of silence costs, because Grace paid every cent of it. The baby shower was, by every external measure, a success. The house was beautiful, flowers everywhere, the specific warmth of a room full of women who love the person being celebrated and want the afternoon to feel like that love made visible. The food was excellent. The gifts were generous. The games were the kind that make everyone laugh, including the people who claim to dislike baby shower games. Patricia moved through the room with the ease of someone in their natural element. She greeted guests. She directed the caterers. She accepted compliments on the organization with the modest warmth of someone who has done this before and knows how to wear the credit gracefully. She was, in the specific performance of the devoted mother-in-law and soon-to-be grandmother, flawless. Grace watched her. Not obviously. Grace had spent 4 months watching Patricia without being seen to watch, and she was very good at it by now. She watched her from across the room during the gift opening, from the kitchen doorway when Patricia was arranging the dessert table, from the corner of the living room where she sat with her oldest friends and half listened to conversation, while the other half of her attention tracked the woman in the silk blouse moving through the room like she owned it. In a certain sense, Patricia believed she did own it. Not the house. She understood that belonged to Grace and Marcus. But the occasion, the family, the future that was taking shape in Grace's expanding belly. She had arranged for a stake in that future, quietly and legally, and the confidence of having done so was visible in the way she held herself. The specific posture of someone who has secured their position and is now simply enjoying the view from it. There was a moment, midway through the afternoon, that Grace would remember for the rest of her life. Patricia gave a toast. It was gracious and warm and performed with the skill of a woman who had been giving toasts for decades. She spoke about Marcus, about what kind of man he was, what kind of father he would be. She spoke about family, about legacy, about what it meant to bring a child into a family with history and values, and the specific continuity of people who understood where they came from. She looked at Grace when she said the word legacy. Grace looked back. She smiled. The smile was genuine, which was the thing Patricia did not understand and could not have understood, because genuine was not what Patricia expected from Grace in this moment. Grace was smiling because she knew something Patricia didn't. Because the legacy Patricia was describing, the legacy she believed she had secured through a revised estate document, was not the legacy Grace and Marcus were building. That legacy was already built, already documented, already independent of anything Patricia controlled. The toast ended. Everyone raised their glasses. Grace raised hers. An hour later, when the last guest had said goodbye and the caterers were cleaning up, and Marcus was in the kitchen, Grace picked up the small white envelope that had been sitting in her bag all afternoon and walked across the room to where Patricia was arranging leftover flowers. "Patricia," she said, "I wanted to give you something." Patricia turned. She looked at the envelope. She looked at Grace. "What is this?" "A letter from our attorney," Grace said. "I thought you should have it today, specifically." Don't go anywhere, because what Patricia found when she opened that envelope is the part of this story that made 4 months of patience worth every single day. The letter was 3 pages. David Park had written it with the precision of someone who understood that every word would be read carefully by a woman who was not going to miss anything. It outlined, in clear and specific language, the financial and legal structure that Grace and Marcus had established over the preceding 4 months. The family trust, the restructured accounts, the updated estate documents. It noted without drama that the structure had been designed to ensure the complete financial independence of the Holt family unit, Grace, Marcus, and their child, from any external estate provisions, including those that might be contained in documents executed by other members of the Holt family. The final paragraph was the one Grace had written herself, which David had reviewed and approved and included verbatim. It read, "We want you to know that we are aware of the revisions made to the Holt family estate documents in the weeks following the announcement of our pregnancy. We want you to know that we have been aware of this for 4 months. We want you to know that we have spent those 4 months ensuring that whatever those documents contain, they will have no meaningful impact on the life our family is building. We wish you well. We hope that the relationship between you and your grandchild will be built on something better than what you attempted to build with this." Grace stood in the living room and watched Patricia read. Patricia read slowly. She was a careful reader. Grace had always known this about her, had seen it in the way she absorbed information, and filed it, and retrieved it later with precision. She read the letter once. Then she read the final paragraph again. The silence in the room lasted a very long time. When Patricia looked up, the smile was gone. Not replaced by anger. Grace had not expected anger, had prepared for it, but had not expected it as the first response. What replaced the smile was something Grace had never seen on Patricia's face before. The specific expression of someone who has understood, all at once, that the ground they believed they were standing on is not there. "You knew?" Patricia said. Her voice was very quiet. "The whole time." "Yes," Grace said. "The dinners, the furniture store, the—" "Yes." A long pause. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I wanted to be sure," Grace said. "And because I wanted you to have today. The shower you planned, the toast you gave. I wanted you to have it, knowing that what you did 4 months ago didn't work. That it had never worked from the moment we found out about it." Patricia looked at the letter. She looked at Grace. She looked at the doorway to the kitchen, where Marcus appeared. He had heard the shift in the quality of the silence and had come to stand at the edge of it. "Marcus," Patricia began. "I know, Mom," he said. His voice was even. "Grace told me in October. I've known as long as she has." The expression on Patricia's face in that moment, the understanding that her son had known, had sat at her Sunday dinners and accepted her hugs, and watched her plan the baby shower knowing what she had done, was the thing Grace had been waiting 4 months to see. Not with pleasure, exactly, with the specific satisfaction of a thing being completed, of a record being set straight. "I want to be your grandchild's grandmother," Grace said. "I want that genuinely. But I need you to understand something clearly. The relationship you have with this child will be built on what you actually are to them, not on what you control, not on what you've arranged, on what you are. That's the only currency that works with us." She picked up the letter from Patricia's hand. She folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. "Think about what you want to be," Grace said. "We'll be here when you decide." She walked back across the room to where her friends were saying their goodbyes. She did not look back. Type Grace in the comments, because that walk across the room, that was everything. Patricia did not speak to Grace or Marcus for 6 weeks after the baby shower. Grace had expected this. The silence was the response of someone who needs time to recalibrate, to understand the new shape of a situation and decide how to inhabit it. She had given Patricia space for exactly that purpose, and she had not filled the silence with anything except the ordinary business of preparing for a baby. Their daughter Lily was born in December. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with Marcus's eyes and Grace's stubbornness, which became apparent within the first week. Patricia called 2 days after the birth. She asked if she could visit. Grace said yes. The visit was quiet and careful in the specific way of 2 people who have said true things to each other and are now figuring out what to build in the space those truths have cleared. Patricia held Lily with the specific gentleness of someone who understands that this is not a relationship she can take for granted. She did not make comments about nursery colors or feeding schedules, or any of the dozen things she would have made comments about 4 months earlier. She simply held the baby. She looked at her for a long time. "She's beautiful," Patricia said. Her voice was different from the voice Grace had heard at the baby shower. Quieter. Something had gone out of it. Not warmth, but the performance of warmth. What remained was the actual thing, which was smaller and less polished and considerably more real. "She is," Grace said. They have not discussed the letter again. Grace does not know if they ever will. What she knows is that the relationship between Patricia and their daughter is being built exactly as she had said it would be, on what Patricia actually is in the room, in the moment, with the child in her arms. Not on what she arranged or controlled or attempted to secure in advance. The estate documents remain as Patricia wrote them. Grace and Marcus have not asked her to change them. The structure they built renders them irrelevant, and relevance, Grace has learned, is the only thing worth fighting for. She did not fight for the documents. She built something the documents couldn't reach. That is the difference between reacting and preparing, between the response that comes after the damage and the structure that makes the damage impossible. Grace had prepared. 4 months of Sunday dinners and furniture stores and smiles that carried more information than Patricia ever knew. 4 months of building something Patricia couldn't see or touch or revise. She had prepared, and when the moment came, she had been ready. Lily is 4 months old now. She has, as predicted, strong opinions about everything. She has her father's eyes and her mother's precision, and the specific determination of someone who arrived in the world with things to accomplish and is not interested in delays. Patricia comes on Sundays. She brings food, always too much, which is the specific love language of a woman who was raised to express care through provision and has not yet found another vocabulary. She sits on the floor with Lily and makes faces and accepts being grabbed with the resigned delight of a grandmother in the grip of a 4-month-old who has discovered that everything within reach is interesting. She and Grace do not have an easy relationship. They probably never will. What they have is an honest one, the specific honesty of two people who know what they are to each other and have decided that the child between them is worth more than the unresolved things they are also to each other. Marcus watches this on Sunday afternoons with the expression of a man who is holding something complicated and has decided it is worth holding. He told Grace once on a quiet evening after his mother had left that the hardest part of the whole thing was not the planning or the execution or even the confrontation at the baby shower. The hardest part, he said, was the Sunday dinners. Sitting across from his mother, knowing what he knew, and saying nothing. Grace told him she knew. She told him he had been extraordinary. He said she had been extraordinary first. They are, by any honest measure, fine. Better than fine. They are the specific thing that two people become when they have been through something difficult together and have come out of it knowing each other more completely than they did before. The white envelope is in a drawer in Grace's home office. She has not looked at it since the day she gave it to Patricia. She does not need to. What it said has been said. What it meant has been understood. Some things, once delivered, do not need to be revisited. They simply need to have been sent. If this story found you somewhere you needed it, if you recognize something in the 4 months of patience, or in the smile that carried more than it showed, or in the walk across the room that ended something and began something else, leave a comment. Tell me where you are. Subscribe for new stories every week. See you next time. All stories on this channel are fictional narratives created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, companies, or events is coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of family boundaries, long-term strategy, and the specific power of being prepared.